Good morning, everyone. Thank you for waiting for us these few minutes. We are live from Vespasiano, Minas Gerais. Welcome to the third quarter results call for the Pardini Group. We inform that participants have their microphones off, just listening to the presentation. At the end of the presentation, we'll begin the Q&A session. Questions should be asked exclusively via chat. I will read and the directors will respond. We will not open the mics for participants to ask questions. I kindly ask that you write your name so we know who's asking the question when we read it. The slides of this presentation are available at our investor relations website in the results tab. Before we move forward, we would like to clarify that any statements that can be made regarding the businesses of the company forecast, operational and financial goals are assumptions and beliefs of the Hermes Pardini Institute, as well as information that is currently available for the company. Future considerations are not ensured for results because it involves future events and depending on circumstances that may or may not happen. The general economic conditions and industry conditions can affect the future results of the company and can lead to results that differ materially from those that are expressed in future expectations. Roberto Santoro is here with us. Alessandro, Dani, segue. Dani.
Also, Adriana Linhares, the Executive Director of PSC Business. Guilherme Polares, our Executive Director of Operators. Fernando Ramos, our Lab-to-Lab Business Executive Director. João Varenga, the IT and Digital Executive Director. And I am the IR and M&A Executive Manager. My name is Carlos Biel. Now I'll turn over to Roberto Santoro, our CEO. Please continue, sir. Thank you, Biel. Good morning. I would like to welcome everyone. This is another live meeting from the Pardini Group, and we're very pleased to present the results regarding the third quarter of 2022. You know that in June 30th, we had the merger of business between the Fleury and Pardini Group. This operation is now being approved by the agency that regulates mergers and acquisitions. I would like to highlight some points related to our evolution in the environment ex-COVID or after COVID. And then Camilo is going to present in depth our results. First, I would like to talk about our strategy and how consistent it has been for the past years. It has been renewed, but always consistent. The results of the third quarter reflect a strategy that has been continually implemented. This is a company that has existed for a long time and that keeps on delivering profitability, but always along the lines of its strategy. We have reached some historic records and also supported by the results of the COVID years. The pandemic is no longer a global health problem. Now life has become a little bit closer to normal now that we have the vaccines. And of course, business have become more like the business we had in 2020 before the pandemic. So it's only natural that because of the improvements in the pandemic, this revenue is no longer so relevant. But now clearly we show a reduction in COVID-related revenue. But on the other hand, we are reaping the fruit of what we had started to implement, especially way back in 2020. So the company is moving on its strategy, strengthening the results, and generating value to our shareholders and also to the stakeholders of the health supply chain. Now, talking specifically about production, we have set a new production volume. And Pardini has consistently broken its own volume records of tests that have been processed. And this quarter, it was no different. When we compare the first 9 months of 2022 with the same period of last year, our test volume has grown by 19%. And along the year, we have set new monthly records in terms of volume of tests. And that's interesting for the market where we operate. This record production was only possible because Pardini has strongly invested in the implementation of a new enterprise model that allows us more efficiency, scale, and access to more regional. Because of that, we have reached very high speed in processing and release of tests. And that's good for all our operations, especially our B2B operation, which is the lab to lab operation. We acquired several companies along the way, and another lab to lab was acquired to strengthen not only our decentralization strategy because of the competitiveness in some regions, but also to be able to expand in regional markers that are far away from our hub in the metropolitan area of Belo Horizonte. Comparing the first 9 months of 2020 with the same period of 2021, our gross revenue has grown by 6%. And in the lab to lab business, this growth has totaled 32%. And also the revenue of our own PSC businesses, the patient service centers, have increased by 13% without considering COVID tests. I would like to make some highlights related to PSC, the patient service centers. In the third quarter, we had a 22.5% growth in the ex-COVID gross revenue vis-a-vis the same period of last year. It's worth saying that there has been a significant growth, a three-digit growth in the volume of tests performed in the state of São Paulo. This is where our expansion was the largest. This is due to the investments that we've made in acquisition of new companies, opening of new units in the state of São Paulo, as well as a new contract from a very large HMO in the state of São Paulo. And this contract became effective in the end of 2021. So we started 2022 with 5 units in the state of São Paulo. Considering the metropolitan area of São Paulo, we now have 21 units, 16 units that have been added in 2022. Considering acquisitions that were made in the São Paulo and São José dos Campos region, we have 37 service centers in the state of São Paulo. This is the largest health market in Brazil, and Pardini has positioned itself very relevant in some niches. We are not getting any audio.
We'll come back to Dr. Roberto Santoro's participation through a different link. We kindly ask that you wait, that we're going to come back to Dr. Roberto Santoro's link for him to continue the introduction of our report. What report was alluding to talks about our growth and expansion in the city of São Paulo, which is still ramping up. It's important to highlight that many of these investments were from the last accredited units took place in about the last 2 months or even less than that. So the growth is extremely relevant in the geography of São Paulo, but it's still ramping up. And these new accreditations coming from HMOs and health insurance and co-ops, which we have been working with throughout the year. The São Paulo geography, as Roberto mentioned, it is a significant uh, um, uh, business location nationally, considering that from São Paulo you establish uh, commercial relationships with nationwide HMOs, which are relevant in other geographies, and that brings ties much closer together, in which we have been able to make use of in the locations of Belo Horizonte, Goiânia, Belém, and now the coast side of São Paulo. So Dr. Roberto is back with us. Dr. Roberto, if you please. Thank you, Alessandro. We had a quick technical issue, but we're back. I'm going to quickly come back to our highlights, lab to lab. What I was mentioning that the lab to lab channel, it's a high added value business as pathological anatomy and personalized medicine. They continue growing and had growth of gross revenue of 2 digits in the quarter. That's very important in the specialization of our clients and the increase of profitability in time. And with a multidisciplinary focus in our business generating capacity with partnering labs, once again, we had recurring growth of lab to lab clients. We increased our client base in 5%, coming to 6,245 clients monthly, generating monthly revenue. We also grew on an average volume per client 12.3% compared to the third quarter of 2021, showing this high specificity and a tailored medicine for clients, and also with interdependence with clients. So in closing, as I always say, at the group Pardini Group, our priority is to present results that are consistent with our strategy that's established end to end, ensuring returns not just to investors, but our connection and relevance in the healthcare value chain. Our relevance to HMOs, which is a significant, very important link in the chain. Alessandro probably mentioned a few things during this break. The availability of business units, products, portfolio, geographies increased significantly, especially in the state of São Paulo. We are sure that we are following the right path. It's important in our strategy. We have invested significantly in acquisitions that strengthen our strategic plans and will converge into good results. We continue investing in acquiring companies that strengthen our outreach in the lab to lab model, being able to be closer to clients from that channel, especially certain regions, such as the acquisition of Solução in Itajaí, in Santa Catarina, and another acquisition Camilo will mention, CSV from Victoria. And our priority remains as to present a consistent strategy, but thinking on a mid-long term. Once again, I'd like to thank everyone who's here with us at this third quarter results call. And now I'll hand the floor over to our CFO, Camilo de Leles, who will go deeper into the details, especially the figures. Thank you very much. Well, Roberto, thank you so much. Good morning, everyone. And thank you for participating in our results call. First, as Roberto mentioned, I'd first like to lead our conversation for results basically focused on the company for the future. When we look at the past in comparison, there's the unbalanced effect of COVID results and volumes. It's important to look at the company for the future. What we're doing today is preparing the company for the coming quarters and the coming year. This quarter, especially, we have recorded a new record in volume, 44.9 million tests. So 15 million tests monthly, rounded figure. So if you want to look at it annually, 180 million tests. On the other hand, we had a reduction of the share of COVID tests. Today is at 3% of the revenue. We also record a record gross revenue, 550.4 million BRL, growth of 19% compared to the same period last year. And our EBITDA was a record EBITDA for the period, 99.1 million, growth of 18.8% over the third quarter of last year. So without the COVID effects, as Roberto mentioned, the 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 volume of COVID will be very small. We also recorded net profit around 30 million reais, almost 6% of net margin. Obviously, this effect that we have in the period is introduction of new fixed costs, considering all the growth we had in São Paulo. Our renegotiation with our clients due to price adjustments. This will continue reflecting the net results for the coming periods in the coming quarters. So the results of this quarter has been absorbed in terms of introduction of new fixed costs and inflation we had in terms of labor, materials, transportation, fuel, and we have not yet then put this price forward yet. So our margins in the coming months will be better and will recover that margin. As for our operating cash, almost 120 million reais, and we also had in that quarter the distribution of 15.9 million at JCP. So we're still working in the maintenance of 0.25% of folks who are not in default, not paying with our results. As for growth, Roberto mentioned, I want to go back to personally state that we had acquisition of two new companies, CSV Lab, the Serological Center of Victoria. We acquired the company for 17.8 million in the month of September. The company, 25 years of history. Pardini now has one more option, being a reference in lab tests in another state. Obviously, it'll be another NDO in the state of Espírito Santo. In the last week, early November, we concluded the acquiring Hugo Cerveiro Brandão Lab, a pathological anatomy lab founded in 1969, Hugo Silviano Brandão. Basically, it's comprised of pathologists and high complexity of tests that will support our product portfolio. Also in São Paulo, there was the opening of new units in São Paulo today. We opened 16 new units. As Roberto mentioned, it's 37 units. So considering this growth, in São Paulo, there was a high volume of introduction of new fixed costs, personnel, power, rent. All of the volumes are still moving forward, but within our forecast. And we believe in the first and second quarters of next year, we will reach the expected volume.
I've already mentioned that we have hit record volumes in tests in this quarter. And we've been setting new records since the first quarter of 21. The same was true for the second quarter of 21 and the third quarter of 21, the first quarter of 22, the second quarter of 22, and again in the third quarter, we are setting a new record. We are constantly growing and showing better figures. The volume you see of 44.3 million, if you remove the COVID effect, it's still 20.8% higher than the third quarter of 2021. So the COVID volume this quarter accounted for just 200,000 tests. That's the lowest volume since April 2021. So we have a very small volume of tests, COVID tests today. So the gross revenue totals 567 million, some of them recurring revenue, 462 in the last quarter. So a 19% growth. That's very good. So last year we had 86 million related to COVID and 17 this year. It's not here reflected the inflation costs transfer that we have already applied and in lab to lab toxology and PSC in São Paulo in the state of Goiás. So this is going to have an impact in the next quarter. So the fact that we will be transferring the inflation costs. So here's an example of how our curve of what COVID tests represent in our gross revenue. So in the fourth quarter of 2020, 27.4% of our gross revenue accounted for COVID tests. So we made the best of those times to make investments, and the cash generation, EBITDA generation was very high in that time. And now in the third quarter of 2022, COVID tests just accounted for 3% of our growth revenue, totaling 17 million reais, as mentioned before. In terms of gross profit, you will see that there is a reduction, but there is a significant contribution of COVID in the previous period of 42 million that today is just 4 million. So we had a very positive growth effect, 132 million versus 110. So a 10% growth. And that is the company, and that is the status of the company we're going to use to plan 2023. The EBITDA also had a drop, so 42 million in the previous period, in the third quarter of 2021 is 42.2, much lower today. So excluding the COVID effects, it's almost 100 million reais vis-a-vis 79 million reais. This is a significant growth that totals 25 million reais. We also had the introduction of fixed cost system in this unit of São Paulo. 40 million a year, basically. And that impacts our figures for 2022. But we're still not captured all the revenue we expect to have for next year. So the 25% effect in EBITDA growth is very significant vis-a-vis the same period of last year. Operating expenses, as you can see, there was a major effort to maintain these expenses. There was a 10% of growth profit. And everything we've done to maintain and reduce costs are reflected in our current EBITDA margin. So that relates to SG&A stability. So we have the 12.5% effect on net revenue, even considering the impact we had of 10% increase in labor. So this is when we had salary increases in September due to union negotiations. And there was a major effort done internally so that we could keep the same level of expenses that accounts for 2.5% of our net revenues. It was a major effort to that end, and that has an impact on the 100 million costs I've mentioned before. And finally, net income. It was almost 30 million reais, 6% net margin vis-a-vis the net income. Last year was 10.4%. 52.7 million and 42 million reais, that excluding COVID tests. Last year, we had a total of 12 million, and now it's over 30 million. So again, a significant increase. It's always important to compare figures considering COVID revenue and ex-COVID as well, because sometimes we are just looking in the rear view mirror, and of course we need to consider what lies ahead in the future as well. Cash generation, as I've mentioned before, total almost 120 million reais, 114% of EBITDA. Last year was 99.7%, although last year the volume was much higher. So cash generation today is much better because of all our effort to control our working capital. We are giving full attention to the CapEx so that it can generate revenue and results. The net debt is very conservative, 0.4% in relation to the total EBITDA. We are now preparing to get more resources from the market for the settlements that are expected to be paid in the beginning of 2023. So everything is accounted for, and we plan to keep the same level of net financial debt EBITDA ratio. We believe that is going to be even better in 2023. And again, this is our ROIC, excluding the premium. So here, 33.9%. This again relates to EBITDA with a lower effect this quarter. So the ROIC with goodwill totaled 16.5%, the ROIC without goodwill 33.9%. So we believe that the ROIC is satisfactory at the level of 16.5 today still. So that's what I had to share with you. I'll turn over back to Roberto for his final remarks, and then we'll open for questions. Oh, actually, we're going to turn over to BL first. Thank you, Camilo. Thank you, Roberto and Alessandro. Now I'm going to move to the Q&A session. To ask questions, please use the chat. I'm reading the questions here, so when you ask a question, please identify yourself. First question from Felipe Amancio with Itaú BBA. Good morning. Thank you for taking my question. So we've seen a significant increase in the volume of tests that have been occurring for quite some time. How much of that is related to lab growth and how much of that relates to PSC? And he has a second question. The average ticket has reduced over the year. What is the main offender? Is it the change in the COVID contribution in the quarter, or is there anything else that could have had an impact on that? Are you able to add the 60 to 70% of the inflation rate in the negotiations with HMOs? This ratio between lab and PSC is something we do not disclose in quantitative numbers. Now I'll turn over to Alessandro so that he can answer this question. Thank you, BL. Thank you for the question. As BL said, we do not disclose the PSC and lab volumes, but both business units have increased their business significantly. PSC has had a very strong growth because of the leverage of São Paulo operations in the expansion initiative that was implemented in the last month. As to the average ticket, COVID had indeed a strong impact on the average ticket value. We had huge volumes when we compared year over year. And if we compare January of next year with January of this year, we'll still see a lot of differences in the average ticket. So this is not the type of baseline we are able to complete because until the third quarter of this year, COVID values are still very high. We like to analyze what we call a price index in the 100 base. This relates to the pricing in the market. Our price indices in lab to lab and in PSC businesses, especially now with the readjustments in price that have been measured, they are above 100%, which means we're able to recover our prices vis-a-vis the quarters from other years. As to the payers, I'm sure you're talking about HMOs, and the answer to your question is yes. Right now, we are able to negotiate between 70 to 75% of readjustments in PCA, that's the inflation rate, and some HMO contracts do not follow one specific renewal date. They're usually renewed along the year. And the third quarter, there is a higher number of contracts that are renewed. And indeed, we are able to get a recovery of 70 or 75% of one of the inflation rates.
Thank you, Alessandro. Folks, I want to remind you all, if you want to ask questions, please use the chat and identify yourselves. Next question comes from Stella Strano from JP Morgan. Good morning, folks. I have a question here on our side. Could you please explore what an average of a gross margin the COVID tests added, and how much of the impact comes from the decrease of the COVID tests? Camilo presented actually a slide on that. I'm going to move over to Camilo to talk about it. Stella, good morning. Thank you for your question. When we, as we mentioned here on the slide, number 15 slide, the share of COVID in a gross margin was, the margin was 25.4%. The recurring operations was 25.6, which is the 129.9. In the past, the previous year, we had 42.7 million of a margin contribution in reais. That was 27.5. And recurring operations was 31.7 in the last quarter. So that's the contribution of COVID during the period. It's almost 36 million difference in terms of COVID. Thank you, Camilo. Next question comes from Joaquim Roxo from Tene Capital. Good morning, Dr. Roberto, Camilo, and team. Could you please update us on the competitive landscape of the lab-to-lab market? Going to then have Fernando Ramos, our lab-to-lab director, responding to that one. Thank you, Biel. Thank you, Joaquim, for your question. Joaquim, we have seen the lab-to-lab market still highly competitive, as we always highlight on our calls. It is a market that's got large competitors, robust competitors, and so it's always a tough market. What we have seen for some time was a greater it's more of a rational competition in the market, which has helped us in the last couple of years, especially, to perform a number of important initiatives, such as the price readjustments that took place January this year. As Biel mentioned on the release, and Dr. Roberto just mentioned, we anticipated the price adjustments of January 2023 because of a greater inflation impact compared to the initial scenario we had. But these are actions that mirror this more of a rational moment in terms of competition in the market. It's important to raise the fact that we have seen a number of movements, not just from Pardini, but from the other players as well, um, offering a better value bundle or packaged over to labs around Brazil. I'm talking about price, term, and quality, payment terms and quality, basically. So it's a full package, a full delivery. A number of initiatives also related to the delivery times for labs. It is an ever more important requirement in decision making. Along that sense, we see that the acquisition that was performed at the end of September, CSV Lab in Victoria, we see that this is 100% in line with our competitive strategy for lab to lab, seeking decentralization of our productive model so that we can offer a more competitive turnaround times, more competitive service for our clients, and we also have the benefit of greater competitiveness, greater test volume, and not just low complexity tests. We have received also a request for high complexity tests, as we have seen here on the figures, Joaquin. But the key message is the market continues tough. It's difficult, but it's more rational than what it was in the past. Thank you, Ramos. And this question then concludes our questions and answers session. I hand the floor back to Dr. Roberto for his final remarks. Dr. Roberto, if you please. Thank you, Biel. I would like to conclude emphasizing the role of our strategy. Camilo has demonstrated transparently the ex-COVID scenario. And that shows that, the future scenario is a growth outlook of our recurring revenue. COVID was a non-recurring moment for all the healthcare industry or chain as a whole. That tends to a greater uh, uh, more stable condition, and we're showing how much the company is non-COVID dependent. Some important points I'd like to highlight. The Pardini Group is a company that has different interfaces with different businesses, almost 50-50 B2B, but B2C with close relationships with HMOs, clients, and their brands. We have implemented new strategies throughout this period. There's Mobi Health, Saúde Mobi, a new relationship with a client, customers, a new relationship with hospitals, not just with standalone hospitals, but hospitals that are part of important verticals that have a outpatient clinic strategy and specialization strategies. Another part that we're implementing is personalized healthcare, especially in immunohistochemistry, pathological autonomy. What we see is a growth of expert tests, specialized tests that those are more elective appointments and don't require urgency or emergency, but we're paying close attention to this mix of tests and this multidisciplinary aspect of the company, resources, competencies have allowed us to sign other agreements. Recently, we signed a a support lab to lab agreement with a major Brazilian healthcare vertical that's very relevant in terms of connection. So Pardini has been connecting to several healthcare stakeholders. We have products and services for all of them. Pardini has become specialized, and we have another business which is forensic forensic toxicology besides the professional toxicology. And forensic toxicology has cycles according to regulation and legislation with the influence of the local uh, DMVs, and so tests that will be performed at some point, and we have not lost market share in that segment. So um, that ex-COVID company is open, is highly connected to different links of the value chain, multiple businesses, various clients, personalized medicine. There's a pharmaceutical industry also that's connected. And so, especially throughout Camilo's presentation, we saw transparently what this company looks like for the future in terms of recurrent business. Finally, I'd like to again emphasize that our investor relations area, led by Carlos Biel, is available for any questions, any additional interaction that you folks deem necessary. I want to thank all of the employees, our internal clients, leadership, directors, for these results and this strategy. Thank you so very much. Have a wonderful day.